Hello everybody, welcome to what will be my first impressions of Elden Ring based on my first playthrough. For a brief context, I have completed the entire campaign and a lot of side content as spoiler free as possible in about 230 hours. I tried a spell based mage or what they would call a sorcerer build. Now this is a huge game and I usually love to touch details here and there, so this will be a long review and will have a few spoilers. I will be going through different components of the game and share my thoughts on each. So let's not hold back and jump into one of the most alluring aspect of the game, open world. This is the first time we are seeing From Software creating an open world game, and boy they made it huge. One of the first things you will start noticing while playing the game is that it's huge, really huge. They definitely aimed above and beyond when deciding on the scale of the map. It is also a very beautiful and scenic world. Nothing like the dark and gloomy monotonous depressions they had in the past. I like the variety in biomes, right from the starting area of green lush hills till the snow-laden endgame areas. For someone who has done it for the first time, they have definitely done an impressive job. However, with its beauty also comes a few shortcomings. Many parts feel vastly empty with absolutely no content. There are several places with screens and screens of uninteresting content all over the game. The game also felt somewhat unbalanced owing to its open world nature and due to its sheer size. For example, you will notice that you do well against a boss of an area and suddenly the regular enemies in the next area have substantially more hit points and deal more damage than you would anticipate. This is more obvious especially after the capital. Another thing that felt awkward are the random teleport portals. At some places they are completely fine, such as the ones at belfries. Or the one to Halictree from the town of Ordina since they build up to it. But random teleports like Snowfield to Moog feel completely disruptive and abrupt. One moment you are far in the north exploring some snowy area, and the other moment you are suddenly underground far in the south. That mostly felt like a ruined exploration experience for me. While we are on the topic of open world, let's talk about the level design of the game. They did a pretty good job of keeping their impressive levels even within such a vast open world. All across the map you will find these enclosed locations which are small levels of their own. They call it legacy dungeons. Most of these major locations are uniquely crafted levels, each with their own theme and ambience. The other smaller catacombs and tunnels are mostly similar with even repeat bosses, which is something I dislike. However, since they are small enough, I do not mind it. I like Lindell the most of all the big areas. I could not have put this better than Marcus, and in his own words, this is the capital that they probably dreamt of while imagining an Orlando. The most striking feature being several routes to explore and the story that the level silently speaks of the great battle between the city and the big dragon. Then there are these other places they definitely wanted the player to feel the pain, and boy did they succeed. Starting with the Lake of Rot. This is an entire area that will inflict a strong version of poison damage over time just while walking through it. What's more, one status ailment is not sufficient. They placed all these frogs that spew death fog which will instantly kill you regardless of your HP if the status bar fills up. Then there is an entire town full of these frogs hiding well in the vegetation. There are these stormy area of consecrated snowfields. It's permanent and cannot be removed. I understand that there could be a narrative implication to it, but they did not stop there. They added archers mounted on wolves who deal tremendous damage, can easily kill that useless torrent. On top of that, they added these translucent giants that can teleport onto you. Let me emphasize, restricted player vision and putting ranged mounted enemies was not enough. You had these giants with shit ton of hit points who to hit like a truck that are also semi-invisible and who also teleport onto you in groups to kill you. Then the layout is such that you are likely to fall off a cliff while running away from them. They must be feeling really smart for all this, but I honestly felt that they went a bit overboard with this. Halictory as well at times gets pretty annoying in the name of difficulty. This big guy placed over here can easily one-shot you. That was not enough, they placed these rot spewing plants on the way so that even if you manage to run from the big guy, the rot will likely kill you. It also has some nasty tricks up its sleeves if you go melee with it. Another location in the same area is the Swamp of Rot. Harsh status ailment, check. Impaired player movement, check. Enemies that are hardly visible and lurking in the cesspool, check. Annoying cockroaches that do not stagger when hit and take half of your hit points in one spell, check. Did I forget to mention that small, hardly visible pests can stagger you in one hit? We'll get into the details of that annoying design in a later section. Overall, the devs just don't cut any corners. I don't even want to bring up the annoying hero graves and the invincible one-shooting chariots that they have put up over there. Speaking of annoying, AI win the medal here. Where shall I start? Dogs, big dogs, rats, dragonflies, all kinds of aggressive birds. And the worst of them all are these revenants. These, I'm sure, are FromSoft's personal favorites. They are absolutely terrifying, have an obnoxious scream, they teleport behind you to remove the lock on and get some iframes, they spew poison on ground that staggers you regardless of your poise, have an infinite hit combo that's bound to kill you. Absolutely evil and annoying. I don't want to discuss the hands of Carrier Manor. Man. Many enemies have these delayed animations that often force my judgment off. I understand that this was to keep the challenge up for a lot of fans who have overcome the challenges of previous titles, but I personally find no pleasure in designs that doesn't make sense. For example, the sorcerers in Raya Lucaria have nearly 2 times as much range as the player for the same spells. Theirs is just a Viagra version and feels like players and AI are playing the same game by different rules. Most bosses are also equally annoying, if not worse than the ones in Dark Souls 3. So many bosses or tougher enemies have this gazillion hit combo that leaves players wondering when they are supposed to attack. It feels more like watching a cinema where you are just munching dodges instead of popcorn while the hour-long combo gets spammed. Most enemy attacks can kill players in less than 3 hits. A majority can just one-shot the player outright. And still they felt the need to add this gazillion hit combo for so many enemies. I just do not understand how one thinks this is interesting and engaging. Since we are talking about design decisions and considerations, let's talk about gameplay. Over the past decade or more, FromSoft has experimented with a lot of gameplay mechanics. You can see the results of their experiments in Elden Ring. I pretty much like the overall gameplay experience in Elden Ring. It seems like several character builds are viable, and that's something alluring for such a game. Several weapons promote build varieties that would otherwise feel underwhelming or uninteresting. For example, a katana that also scales of intelligence. I like the design of block and heavy attack retaliation that helps break enemy poise and score a critical hit. This really makes shield builds and overall blocking a viable choice during combat. Jump attacks also tend to do more damage to enemy poise and help in scoring critical hits. I also like the idea of many bosses being parryable. By having to parry them up to 3 times to break their poise, it strikes a great balance between player skill and empowering them. The rework of weapon arts as Ashes of War and ability to tune in any regular weapon to a certain affinity is absolutely brilliant in terms of build viabilities. The possibilities are just numerous. Oh, and I am a fan of sneaking around. One reason it took me so long to beat the game is because I was sneaking around even in the open world. Nothing feels better than to grab an enemy by surprise from behind for a backstab, especially if the backstab throws it off a cliff. Whee! Bye bye! Combat on horse is meh and limited to attacking once per run across an enemy. It's worse for magic users since you hardly had 1 to 2 spells that can target behind you, and hitting spells while target is onto you is just a bit difficult. One thing in particular that I despise is input reading. I find it okay at 1 or 2 places, but roll catch, heal punish, NPC dodging player attacks by input reading attacks, all that feels very cheesy and non-creative. There are many design decisions that I am not a fan of. For example, dogs inflicting bleed on a 100% block. The logic behind bleed status ailment is that certain sharp weapons rip through the flesh and cause it to continue to lose blood. When player blocks the attack completely, getting inflicted with bleed does not make sense. We are already paying in stamina being consumed for the blocking. To that extent, I did not like Malenia healing over the blocked attacks as well. Her heal is very substantial. Lifesteal is fine, but healing over 100% blocked attacks just feel deceitful for the player. Another trend that I noticed often and do not appreciate is putting large bosses in small areas, where they clip through the entire place and often put players' camera at a disadvantageous angle. This is especially frustrating because it often leads to deaths that feel like unfair and unjust, just because you were not able to see your boss or see the coming attack and you get hit and punished for that. This is on the game devs, not on the player. An addition to Elden Ring that I really appreciate is the summon ashes. After losing my patience to the annoying AI combat, I started exploiting ashes for summons a lot. Some of them are really cool, including the mimic tier that provides a lot of variety to experiment with. Most ashes fall off past mid-game. Some are really stupid. For example, ancestral archers will snipe you from across the map in Siofra River, but while you summon them, they will go in melee and stagger themselves to death. It's just stupid. Crafting is mostly useless in the game. The fact that you need to use arrows to shoot the birds in order to get feathers to craft arrows kills the whole point of crafting. Only boluses is a valid crafting, and that comes in pretty handy at several instances. The materials you randomly gather never tell you what they are used for. By the end of the pretty detailed playthrough that I was still not able to purchase beast liver that is used to craft resistance increasing items. It has somewhat rare drop from animals, and I could not be bothered with killing goats at 18 hours into the game. Really overlooked game mechanic. What I did like is the idea of being able to buy unlimited upgrade materials via some balls that you can chop off enemies, including crystal ladies. Yep, you heard that right. What I do not like, however, is the vague and obscure placements of these balls in the open world. I was not even able to find all of them for the regular ones. Since I played a sorcerer build, let's talk about the spells based gameplay. If you are new to Souls series, magic is usually divided into two broad categories, one that scales of intelligence and the other faith. We can call them sorceries and incantations. As a mage, I found a lot more variety in sorceries compared to previous titles. I really like the moon spell animations. However, despite of all the variety, sorceries are far less varied than incantations. More than half of the game I was simply throwing pebbles or slinging rocks at enemies, which turned out to be the most efficient of sorceries. Apart from frost, all other status ailments are based off faith. Intelligence only gets your magic weapon and frost weapon, whereas faith has lightning, black flame, blood flame, holy, and even poison weapon coatings. Even the animations of many incantations are much cooler than most sorceries. Only a couple of bosses reward with spells. Most bosses will grant incantations. Moreover, status inflicting incantations track target while sorceries do not. Overall, sorceries feel way more overlooked than incantations, and that was disheartening. Few disappointing aspects that I would like to mention are poise, sleep status, and death blight. Poise is supposed to prevent you from staggering and continue your input animation till a certain extent. However, in game, it's non-relevant in many cases. Many enemies without poise, such as dogs, rats, dragonflies, and even baby cockroaches will stagger the player in one hit regardless of the player's poise, making it completely feel like useless. Sleep. I was very interested when I saw sleep arrows and later sleep pots in crafting options. I was super excited when I stumbled upon Saint Rina's sword. It's a weapon whose special attack induces sleep, and learned that status ailment apply faster with arcane stat. I was looking forward to this one unique mechanic in the game that felt like fun and worth making a build out of it. But alas, a lot of enemies are completely immune and many other are resistant, making such a build ineffective for most part of the game. It would be nice if sleep had an effect equivalent to breaking enemy poise on resistant and immune enemies. That would have felt balanced, but they completely butchered it. Death Flight is another mechanic that's absolutely butchered for player builds. For devs, player killing bosses with one hit with Comet Azure is completely fine, but making a build to inflict insta-death status ailment with similar or more levels of preparations, nah, too much fun. Well, thanks for saving me at least another 200 hours of gaming with about 2 builds. I won't be playing those now. To be blunt, the entire story is just too obscure to follow. Right from the Night of the Knights to the Age of the Fracture, none of those words made much sense. Even after digging through a lot of those items' descriptions, the whole formula of putting story in bits and pieces is all tried and tested, but also wearing out its novelty. All the confusing names to that Radagon, Radan, Malina, Malenia, Miquella, Marika, Millicent, and all the n number of god axes. I do see a lot of potential and open ends for a lot more content in the future, but I have lost track of it all. After 230 plus hours of gameplay, I don't even get a closure at the campaign end. They don't even tell us the implications of our decisions, whether we meant the runes or replace our head with a ball of flame. I don't know what Age of Fracture or Age of Dustborn means, or how is Age of Dustborn different than skeletons that are already living in Wrath. Wasn't the Tarnished resurrected from the dead as well by the Spur of Grace? It's all quite obscure for the sake of style for me.
Tarnished of no.
For Quest, this is another area where I felt left out because of too much obscurity. I'm not asking for a quest journal or quest markers on the world map. No, I do not like hand-holding either. But some clearer hints is not going to hurt. Let's compare Dung Eater and Celine. When we reach a certain point, Dung Eater specifically mentions to find his cell under the capital, right? So I know what exact location I am going to go about and explore to stumble upon him. Then there is Celine. She is one of the first NPCs you will encounter in Limgrave. Then you will find her in Weeping Peninsula and she denies to identify you. Then maybe you will stumble upon her doll in Three Sisters, where again she is unresponsive. Never ever she mentions Azur or Lusat to hint you towards a quest connection. Even when she gives you hint to the location of Lusat, it's so vague. She talks about Celia and he's quite far away from there. Like, no, that hidden cave is not anywhere near Celia. Moreover, it's the only illusionary rock in the entire game. Like, how would you even know to look for one? Of course, there's a merchant note, kind of, distantly useful. Later on, even after you get her primal stone, there is no hint about her replacement body. Unless you manage to accidentally break the illusionary wall after the illusionary floor to find her doll. And at that end of such an obscure and vague quest line, all you are rewarded with is a lousy dagger and a spell that you will never use. Just too vague, and I cannot appreciate that. I get it that this brings the community together, but I would be much content if I could figure out most of it on my own, like I did it for Rani or for Dung Eater. That sums up most of the major features. Let's talk about the other finer components. The gameplay based sounds are quite good. Weapons, attacks, spells, dodge animations, footsteps, all the sounds are pretty much on point and don't feel like distracting. For soundtracks, I'm not impressed. Honestly, I did not notice them for almost the entirety of the game. In fact, the only time I noticed the soundtrack was in Stormvale Castle, where it felt so morbid that I just wanted to mute it off. It was very depressing. There is no particular track that I felt like listening to while I'm not playing the game. I started the game with keyboard and mouse and soon found that the key bindings were quite weird, complex and confusing. It's absolutely not user-friendly. Map opens with G instead of M and there are a lot of such non-traditional assignations. Controller felt a lot better and I highly recommend it. Overall, there were very few input delays and the gameplay felt quite smooth in terms of inputs and controls. The UI is pretty clean, minimalistic, and I appreciate that. Nothing fancy. They could have removed the compass from the top of the screen when hiding the HUD. I like the addition of world map and its icons, especially how undiscovered tunnels are indicated. That became a lot more useful once I realized what it was. However, one complaint I do have is that even if you plug in a DualShock controller, the HUD displays Xbox button icons. FromSoft definitely needs to pay more attention to accessibility and quality of life features. And I'm not suggesting an easy mode over here. The whole spirit of Souls-like games is an equal and fair challenge for all. But thinking about physically disabled or challenged players is not going to spoil the reputation or ruin it. Okay, to conclude it, I currently have a love-hate relationship with the game. As much as I would love to jump back into the game and try another build, I am also getting wary of the non-fun AI designs. The perception might change once I have tried a few other builds, but this is what I feel after my first playthrough. It's a pretty good game overall. It's one of the best games out there, there's no doubt in that. But certain points that I highlighted earlier are going to make me avoid playing it again because it's not the part of the game. It's the inwoven mechanic that I will be seeing over and over again, and some of that has already felt like burnout to me. If you ask me, I do recommend to give it a try. My perception is not the same as yours, and I highly recommend it if you have friends who can tag along. Most of the unfun part will be quite fun in multiplayer co op. Please note that these are my personal views and specifically first impressions. They may change over time. You don't necessarily have to agree or disagree with them. Each of us has a unique perspective, and I like to share mine over here. So, what do you think? What was your experience if you have had a chance to play the game? If you have any feedback or criticism for me, feel free to let me know in the comments below. If you think that this would be useful for someone else that you know, please feel free to share it with them. If you have stayed this long, thank you very much for your time. I hope this was useful to you in some way. If it interests you, watch out for the next series coming to the channel. This is LeSlumberingDragon, and God, I need to find a better name for this channel. Until we meet again.